Observation of casual fans, reviewers, and so-called critics alike reveals the common misconception of what constitutes as a low score and what constitutes as a high one. When I see ratings on my anime list or see or watch reviews from common anime fans, there's a very obvious aversion to using any score below a 7 out of 10, and anything 5 or less is almost unheard of. 7 is basically mediocre, 6 means shit, and 5 means the worst anime ever. Wait. There are still numbers that are less than 5, aren't there? 1, 2, 3... Yeah, there are. High school did teach me something after all. Number 1. Building the scale. Let's first start with black and white qualifiers. Good and bad. But what if it isn't good and it isn't bad? Then we must introduce the neutral middle ground, which we'll logically call average. But what if it's not quite good enough to be average, yet not flawed enough to be bad? Let's just call that mediocre, aka below average. What if it's not quite good? Then we can call that above average. What if it's exceptionally bad? Let's call that horrible, or whatever other adjective you like that implies exceptional badness. It doesn't really matter that much. What if it's perfect? Or rather, very close to it? Well, that must be a masterpiece. Fill in the few remaining gaps, and well, the scale builds itself. I'm sure that by now, you can see where this is going. What word means something better than good? Great. What word means something better than great? Amazing. There's a logical reason why this is quintessentially the same scale that my anime list uses. The only flaw in their system is that it doesn't allow for a 0, which would represent a wholly irredeemably bad and meritless anime, an anime whose positive aspects, if they even exist at all, are completely destroyed by the negative. Adding a 0 also puts 5 out of 10 at the precise mathematical average, making it so there are exactly 5 ratings below it and 5 ratings above it. Please allow 0 out of 10 ratings, mall. Number 2. Other rating systems. I will never understand why some people use a scale that goes from 1 to 5, especially considering that said people usually use increments of 0.5 anyways, so it's functionally still a 1 to 10 scale. A legitimate 1 to 5 scale is far too rigid, unless you're not actually trying to be a critic. One person tried to tell me that 7 should be average because around 70% in school is a C, depending on your school, which is supposed to be average. Again though, these scores are simple representations of descriptive qualifiers. This is not a school grading system. A school grading system is still basically a 1 to 5 scale, since even though 50% is the cutoff point for a failing grade, all percentages below that are still ascribed to an F. The percentage stops mattering once you get below 50. This is actually an important point. I think that school percentages are the way they are because it doesn't feel as bad to get like a 55% for a failing grade as it would to get a 1 out of 5. The effect is all psychological though, since it's still the same grade. That's why I think there's an illogical stigma surrounding scores 6 or less. They're all associated with failing grades. It's because of this that if someone's anime or manga scores are all floating in the 7, 8, 9 range, and they refuse to rate anything lower than a 5, you're better off subtracting 5 from their score and pretending it's out of 5 instead to get a more accurate depiction of what they think. For example, 7 out of 10 would only be a 2 out of 5. They're essentially equivalent in the case of that particular person, since they don't even use the lower half of the scale anyway, but 7 out of 10 just sounds much nicer and offends fewer people. Using 5 as a midpoint for what constitutes as average also has merit in the fact that it allows an equal number of scores that are positive and negative. If 7 were deemed average, you'd only have 3 scores, 8 through 10, for net positive titles, as opposed to 5. You'd have 7 scores, 0 through 6, for net negative titles, most of which go unused by the people who adopt that system anyway. Also, you're probably not going to be able to come up with enough qualifiers to equate to each net negative score without starting to sound redundant. Number 3. The comparison basis. If you just want to rate things based on how much you like them, one thing you might want to do is come up with a benchmark anime or two for each rating on the scale to use as a comparison basis. It's good to have some sort of standard, even if it's just based strictly on how much you like each title. Once you have something to compare other titles to, deciding on scores to assign other anime can become a lot easier. I'll show you mine for an example. Butthurt alert! Prepare your anus! The most important thing is setting your own standard for the worst and the best. Again, a masterpiece doesn't mean it's absolutely immaculate, because if you really try, you can nitpick little flaws out of anything. It just means it's as close as possible. It's the best you've seen. You should be extremely conservative with awarding the score to anything no matter how you're deciding on your scores. Even if you're just going strictly by enjoyment, there shouldn't be that many you enjoyed a metric fucking assload. Realistically speaking, a select few will stand above the rest, assuming you actually have standards. Number 4. your mean score, and standards. In a perfect world, your ratings would peak at 5, the mathematical average, and decline gradually as you move toward either extreme, a bell curve. You can even forcibly manipulate your ratings to do this, but I'm sorry, this world isn't perfect, and the bell curve does not exist, unless you fabricate it. You don't have to be very cynical to recognize the fact that there are more bad anime than there are good ones. Just look at any given anime season, and look at the ratio of generic pandering fanservice garbage or forgettable mediocrities to just watchable shows. Then try to pick out the ones that are legitimately good. This logically means that the mean score for any given anime season will be less than 5.0 out of 10, assuming you try to rate everything based strictly on quality as opposed to how much you enjoy it. That aside, even if your scores are based strictly on how much you like it, you should still have standards. I consider a mean score of 7.0 to be about the cutoff point for fanboy dumb, and a mean score of above 8.0 to be of complete and utter retardation. You don't have to rate as low as me, of course, but come on. A mean score over 8? AKA everything you've seen averaged out to being great? Unless you've only ever seen truly astounding anime due to the guidance of someone with impeccable taste, there's no logical way your score should be this high. The only other possibility is that you have no standards, which is much more likely. When the majority of your ratings sit in the 7 to 8 range, it's not really going to mean anything when you give a title such a high score. It follows that giving something a score of 9 ultimately isn't even half as prestigious as it should be. A score that would otherwise signify quite a great achievement loses any meaning when you just pass such high scores out like candy. Which is why, well, not to sound conceited or anything, but you should notice a lot more when I give something an 8 or 9, because that's a ridiculously high score coming from me, as it should be. Number 5, the end. That's it. I don't have some glorious outro for you. All I have to say is that I hope you learned something here and will apply it to yourself. And I hope you have a better understanding of what my scores mean as well. And a 6 out of 10 isn't a bad score, people. Stop whining about it.